So we're kind of like the world leader. You expect to see a headline that says, innovation starts in Canada. But on this occasion, we actually became rational. We said, quit ignoring cannabis and regulate and educate.
The legalization of cannabis, yes, that has been under the jurisdiction of the federal government. How it's going to be sold, where it's going to be consumed, that has been the responsibility of the individual provinces.
I want to reflect the fact that in large measure, older Canadians that we've polled are hugely in support of the idea of cannabis for medical purposes.
So what we've heard from the federal government is that there will be pardons issued for individuals who had a simple possession conviction. And we've also heard that it'll be an expedited process and that the filing fee will be waived.
From the Zoomerplex in historic Liberty Village, the Zoomer with Libby Znaimer.
Welcome to the Zoomer. Recreational cannabis became legal here in Canada on October 17th, 2018, and this ended 9 decades of prohibition. It's a move that the vast majority of Canadians support, but the process has been hampered by supply shortages, a data breach, and uncertainty about whether legal users can be barred from entering the United States. We'll look at how all of this is being sorted out, but first, let's tee up the topic.
Cannabis is legal for medical use in Canada and has been since 2001. Today, more than 330,000 Canadians are registered medical marijuana patients. But how will that change now that cannabis is legal for recreational use? Well, first, here's a look at Canada's relationship with the plant. Last year, Canadians consumed $5.5 billion worth of cannabis, the vast majority for non-medical use. By 2020, legal cannabis sales could reach $6.5 billion. Most Canadians don't use pot, but those who do seem to use it a lot. 4.2 million, or 14% of Canadians, used cannabis for medical or non-medical use in the past 3 months. Of that, 56% use it daily or weekly. There's a rising rate of cannabis consumption among Zoomers, with adults aged 45 to 64 making up 2.3% of the overall share of consumers last year. A new Health Canada report estimates a 41% increase in the consumption of marijuana in the first year of legalization. Within 5 years after legalization, a review of Canada's medical cannabis system will be done. Players in the space successfully fended off a move to get rid of the medical regime. But will that stand? And what would it mean for medicinal users?
So why are dispensaries and online stores now struggling with supply shortages? I've heard all kinds of explanations, including a shortage of legally required bilingual labels. Bruce, is that the reason?
Well, I think the main reason is, when you have 90 years of prohibition, that's a long time to wait in line. And so when people finally get in a store that has something for sale, they buy a lot. But you're seeing across the country a pretty uneven delivery system. So I think probably you're finding a lot more sales in places like Alberta because they have more stores. And I think you're going to find there'll be a lot more sales and a lot more supply in Ontario when the stores open next summer. But overall, I think there's been all kinds of little issues. How do you put a sticker on it as an excise sticker for each province when the stickers don't have glue? Well, we fixed that. But, this is the end of Prohibition isn't elegant, but it was appropriate that it came to a conclusion.
And did you have enough actual marijuana on hand?
Yeah.
And was it all kinds of other problems?
Well, I would say we still have a lot of inventory, and we're shipping a lot of inventory every day. But how long is the lineup going to be? How many times are people going to come back? What format did they want? There really is no place to look. People say, well, what's the U.S. doing? It's actually a big mishmash, and it's illegal federally. What's Amsterdam doing? Well, Amsterdam's actually illegal to grow cannabis plants, but it's legal to sell them. So there's real no data. So we're kind of like the world leader. You expect to see a headline that says, innovation starts in Canada. But on this occasion, we actually became rational. We said, quit ignoring cannabis and regulate and educate. If you think about it that way, why is the rest of the world actively ignoring it? That's good for criminals. So I think it'll become Exhibit A of a very rational outcome that after 90 years, it could have gone a lot worse. It's going pretty well, I think.
Okay, Adina, have you heard from people who are having problems getting their pot?
Especially with postal services,
yeah.
delivery
Yeah,
of
that's-
packages,
that's
and
right.
you know, people are waiting for not just
Yeah.
that, but other medical packages, like, you know, for diabetes. And a lot of people who've been using it medically have places that have been shipping, and they're continuing to get their supplies from those places as well.
A lot of people use medicinal marijuana for pain, but are you finding that people are now starting to self-medicate because it might be easier to get their hands on that stuff?
Well, I actually look at it the other way around. There used to be concerns that people were getting medical authorizations for cannabis because it was the only way to get it legally, even if they wanted to use it for recreational purpose, to the extent that they weren't comfortable going to the black market. So for me, I think what's really great about having the preservation of the two streams is that people who want to use marijuana for recreational purposes now have a legal vehicle to do that. And people who are using it to alleviate symptoms of various diseases, in our case, obviously, arthritis, pain, their supply chain isn't cluttered by people who might have been using it for recreational purposes, which I think wasn't that big a deal. But I think people really like the sense that if it's medicine, they want to know that the form, the dosage, the strain is consistent, because that's what makes it medicine.
Sergeant Moore, I saw a poll which said that people who used to get their marijuana from the black market, from pushers, are still getting it that way.
You know what, I think it's a learning experience for everybody, and definitely there's going to be some learning and some misinformation around where you get it, how to get it. That's what we're seeing in sort of the road safety side and the police side of things, is trying to get sort of a real, I guess, message out there that people can pick up and understand. There's a lot of misinformation happening now, and that's what we're trying to break through with our road safety partners, being from traffic services and dealing with a lot of the impaired driving side of things. That's one of the real efforts that we're looking to make a lot of improvements on.
There's been a lot of controversy around the tests that are used to see if somebody is driving high. How's that working out so far?
It's still illegal to drive, get behind the wheel impaired, whether it be by alcohol or drug. And that's where the misinformation is, that especially in a lot of younger folks that we're seeing, that it's sometimes there's a belief that they might be a better driver. There's a lot of that going around. So that's, although we're definitely in the enforcement business, we're in the education business too. And we're really trying to break through that and get a lot of the misinformation, as I keep repeating myself, but it's really out there. And but the main message is that impaired driving, whether by alcohol or drug, is still impaired driving. And it's still a leading cause, if not the leading cause, of criminal death in the country. So we've got a lot of work to do.
Karima, what issues have come up for you in this initial period?
In the housing sector in particular, there has been a lot of conflict, I think, between landlords, tenants, and particularly within condominiums. So what I've seen are condo bylaws, some better than others, occasionally purporting to ban all tobacco and cannabis smoking and forbid growing. And where there is no exemption for medical patients, I think that this is sort of a backward side effect of legalization, because someone may have been medicating or growing their own plants at home under the radar with no issues, and suddenly they either have to declare themselves or face potential penalties, maybe even a lien on their property or an eviction if they don't comply.
Okay, hold on to those thoughts. We're taking a break, and we will be right back.
I believe every jurisdiction that has criminals should ban the sale of legal cannabis, because it's good for criminals. And if you're in a small town and you ban it, what you've done is just export the purchase of gas and groceries, because they're going to go get the product at the next town that has it.
So I think there is some confusion. The legalization of cannabis, yes, that has been under the jurisdiction of the federal government. How it's going to be sold, where it's going to be consumed, that has been the responsibility of the individual provinces. So in this particular province, they opened it up so that it would only, or could be consumed where cigarettes could be smoked, and we thought that was too permissive. We heard from the public, certainly it was right during the middle of our election, and practically every event we went to, we heard the concern being expressed. And what I found interesting, that even some people who supported the legalization of marijuana did not want to see it consumed everywhere in public places. So varying views on this, but we heard enough concern from people that they didn't want their kids exposed to it, that they didn't want to be coming out of Markville Mall shopping center and confront a group of people consuming cannabis in their presence. But even the nuisance factor, a lot of people commented about the nuisance factor, that when they go out in the public, they didn't want to have to contend with that either. And I can tell you, we've heard from a lot of people prior to us passing the bylaw, and almost to the person, people of all ages, really saying we did the right thing in restricting the consumption of cannabis in public places.
Well, municipalities in Ontario had the right to opt out of allowing retail cannabis outlets in their cities. And you just heard Mayor Frank Scarpitti, who did just that. So did Richmond Hill and Oakville. And he also banned, as he said, smoking marijuana in public places, something that is legal in most municipalities, where the rule is that you can smoke weed in any public place where you can smoke cigarettes. Now, what does all of this mean? People are going to be confused about what they can and cannot do and what the consequences are. Sergeant Moore.
So that's exactly the point I was making at the beginning there. You've got the Cannabis Control Act here in the province of Ontario, you've got the Federal Cannabis Act, and now you have sort of local municipal bylaws that control. So it is confusing to the public, and that's the message through the police and all road safety partners is to get out there and inform yourself. If you're going to be a recreational or medical user, understand, especially when it's connected to a motor vehicle, what the rules are. We know where we've obviously loosened up some of the laws around marijuana and cannabis. Others have tightened up. So we know now with the province brought in, as a young and novice driver, there's zero tolerance. As a commercial truck driver, zero tolerance for any drug or alcohol use. There's other rules that have been brought in, so there's a lot that's happened in a short amount of time, and that's what we're working towards to break through that. And what you do in the privacy of your own home and your own private life is your own business. There's nothing wrong with that.
As long as you're not in a condo.
Well, yeah. But when you involve a motor vehicle, that's where we have a big problem with it. There's no appetite that from anybody through the public or the police agencies.
But presumably, if you break Markham's bylaw about smoking in public, like, you're going to get something the equivalent of a parking ticket, and not, it's not going to be a serious crime.
It is possible. It would be one of those things. I guess the level of enforcement will have to dictate in each particular city.
Yeah, I don't think you'd be looking at a criminal conviction for the municipality laws, but certainly having a patchwork across the province will make things difficult and confusing for people as we proceed.
What do you make of this? I've seen different opinions that by opting out of having the retail stores, that may be bad for the municipalities, both in terms of money that they make, but also it might drive people back to the black market. Do you have a view on that?
I have a view on almost everything.
And
I'm sitting here gyrating slightly because I think you must record this episode.
Of course we are.
In 3 years, when you play it, you're going to conclude that it's like a Monty Python skit where the other team won.
Thanks a lot.
No, but I'm not saying you. I'm saying like where the regulators want to get rid of the medical. Instead, it's going to be the most disruptive thing to the medical platform in the history of the last 100 years because it's an ingredient that's not understood. And the discussion about smoking is the least exciting and effective way to do what they need to do, which is called decarboxylating the cannabis. Sounds very boring compared to saying smoking a joint. But the reason they smoke it is to activate it. And there's a million better ways to activate it. And when you deliver it in those methods, it doesn't have a smell. It has a uniform outcome. It could be this beverage by next Q4.
But those methods aren't legal yet.
No, they're not, but they are actually for gummy bears in the equivalent of a Canadian version. So in the US, they have gummy bears, and the safe way to do is you eat one leg, apparently, and see what turns out. It's nuts. What ours are gel caps, and they're uniform dosage, and so those are legal, and they are available recreationally and medically. But when you take them medically, you can run a clinical trial. And I believe the medical segment is going to go way up as our clinical trials get evidence and success. And when people go to their doctor and they don't have to think they look a little bit sketchy asking for cannabis now. So I think there's going to be a lot more transparency with physicians. And when the format doesn't involve smoking and the titration and dosage is uniform, we're going to start talking about, what can you do for sleep? And we're doing a big study with the Ontario Long-Term Care Association because what they want to do is evict a whole bunch of the current pharmaceutical practices from care facilities. You know, do you really want to have a bunch of tranquilizers, and do you really need that kind of sleeping thing, and do you really need those opioids for an ache? And so I think if you record this one and we play it back in about 3 years, smoking will be a bespoke occasional thing for some people. Medical will probably have upsided down everything from Ambien to opioids, because if you get knee surgery, what you don't need is an on-ramp to addiction. You probably need a cannabinoid concoction that takes the pain from a 7 to a 4. And you won't wreck your knee again because you don't think you're bulletproof because you haven't completely dulled your body. And so I think this, this whole topic, I believe every jurisdiction that has criminals should ban the sale of legal cannabis because it's good for criminals. And if you're in a small town and you ban it, what you've done is just export the purchase of gas and groceries because they're going to go get the product at the next town that has it. And so in Smiths Falls, where we're headquartered, I presented to a group last week and they said, a bunch of us in adjoining towns are thinking that we're going to not sell cannabis. And I said, that's a terrific idea. Because Smiths Falls is coming up and it's starting to boom, and by the time all your citizens come and buy all their groceries and gas and everything in Smiths Falls, plus their cannabis, Smiths Falls is going to be twice as well off. So that's a genius idea. Don't sell it in your community. But you can just see this is going to be a transitional discussion.
We create disincentives for people to use it medically because the only legal way to get it medically is by mail order.
Right.
By mail order. Postal strike aside, that's a real deterrent, and we've priced it the same as recreational, even though it's medicine. So
it's expensive.
And it's expensive. So our view is that we have to get it in pharmacies because if it's medicine, it should be under the care of pharmacists who are equipped with helping people understand.
We're going to get to that later.
Yes, okay, sorry. And we have to make sure that it's not subject to taxation, that that makes it the same whether you take it medically or recreational.
You're nodding your head.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that it's unfair to tax medicine. And just on the point of barriers, the only way currently in Ontario to purchase legally is through the Ontario Cannabis Store website. If you don't have a computer or a credit card or a fixed address, you are locked out of that market. And so if you want to consume your cannabis, you will find an alternate way. And I think that once we have brick and mortar stores, that will alleviate some of the issues, but we do have to keep accessibility in mind.
Okay. On that note, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
It's heartbreaking to have someone dying of cancer. Like, tell me that they spend hours a day searching through parks and back lanes to run into people that might be able to find them some medicine. So I was like, okay, I started up a marijuana information bureau to help refer people to see doctors. You know, I want to talk to my doctor. You know, I'd like to know if I qualify for a prescription. You know, I got cancer, I got arthritis, I got MS. I'm like, it's heartbreaking to have someone dying of cancer. Like, tell me that they spend hours a day searching through parks and back lanes to run into people that might be able to find them some medicine. So I was like, okay, I started up a marijuana information bureau to help refer people to see doctors. And I worked with Moses. I started putting commercials on his radio stations and stuff to refer people to Daniel Schechter at the Cannabinoid Clinic there on Eglinton and Yonge. And I brought Daniel Schechter down to the Zoomer Expo last year. and there's 60,000 seniors that come, and we set up booths and told them about a whole bunch of different products, and the doctor came and lectured to them, and yeah, it was absolutely awesome to be able to help people out. So now, 5 years later, before I opened the coffee shop about 3 months ago, we had about 10,000 members in our social club, and we continue to put on cooking classes, Ganja yoga classes, all sorts of fun activities. And we think about, since I opened it up about 3 weeks ago or so, we've taken on about another 3,000 new members in our social clubs.
Welcome back. The legalization of cannabis has raised many questions about what will happen to the regime for medical marijuana. Right now, you need a doctor's prescription, and you can then order your medicine from a licensed producer and have it delivered by mail. The Canadian Medical Association wanted this system abolished altogether, but advocates prevailed, and the current system is still in place for now. So let's start by unpacking the differences between medicinal and recreational pot. The predominant ingredient in medicinal marijuana is CBD, which, unlike THC, does not make you high. Bruce?
Well, I think people like talking ingredients, but really they're going to shift to talking about outcomes. So if I can help you sleep better, did you want to talk about the proportion of THC and CBD? So really what's going to happen is CBD does help with tremors, but suppose you have Parkinson's. That's one of the presentation symptoms, but you actually need THC and CBD to sleep well. You probably want to have a proportion of THC and CBD so that you actually maybe trigger an appetite with certain terpenes. And so now if you're sleeping better, you're eating better, you can manage those symptoms. If we can take anxiety away, and that's principally CBD, that's starting to sound like a pretty good day. And so I think people are going to talk to us about outcomes, and I think the Canadian Medical Association would love to get rid of cannabis because there's just an unreasonable bias. And I'm not an advocate for cannabis, I'm an advocate for science and turning it into something. I believe these clinical trials are going to disrupt a lot of things, and within 5 years, I can hardly wait to replay their statements on this is just the same thing, because that's the biggest nonsense in the world. People want an outcome.
And what's your take on that? I mean, I think possibly they wanted to get rid of it because they didn't want to be bothered, having patients visit them and ask them for prescriptions. And
well, certainly the Canadian Medical Association fought very hard to see the dismantling of the medical regime, and we understand that it's because of the lack of some of the clinical evidence and the evidence to really understand in depth by different kinds of disease what form and dosage would be most appropriate. But that speaks to the need for evidence, not the fact that it isn't medicine.
A while back, we looked at the future of medical cannabis here at the Roundtable. CAR President Moses Znaimer states members are in favor of cannabis for medical purposes. Let's hear what he said.
I want to reflect the fact that, in large measure, older Canadians that we've polled are hugely in support of the idea of cannabis for medical purposes. And that's why, as I said earlier, I want them to be mindful to check with either the doctor or the pharmacist with whom they have a long-standing relationship to make sure that the interactions that they will set off are going to be beneficial to them.
So you've heard what he just had to say. What do you think, Adina?
Well, at our educational session, it was really very interesting because 60% of the people there self-selected, and this was before legalization, had said that they had used and tried cannabis, and 25% were using it medically. They started recreationally when they were in university. They stopped when they quit smoking cigarettes because it affected lungs. They started again as they aged, for arthritis, for those undergoing cancer treatments, the chemo, the appetite enhancer, some people for stress, anxiety. This is all anecdotal. This was all done, you know, without research, but we were sitting there listening to what people were doing. So, you know, the polls are really very interesting. They would love more research to see how it affects blood pressure or how it affects Alzheimer's. You know, does it stop the plaques from forming? But this now all can be researched. Now that it's legal, we can take a look at the properties of the plant itself, break down the terpenes, see what it's good for medically. And even, you know, recreationally, the people who are saying, well, you know, I don't want it marketed like with blueberry chocolate tint. I want it for what it does for me. So if I'm going to play tennis, or I want something active.
Maybe not so good for the tennis game.
No, exactly. or, you know, if I'm creating, I want something for poetry. And that will be the future as well.
But if it is, let me know. So I think it's very well understood the effects and the help that cannabis can give you in terms of cancer treatment, but everything else is being researched. What research are you sponsoring at the Arthritis Society?
Well, we decided to lead by example when the federal government hadn't really started to embrace the need for research in this area. So we have funded 2 projects, one with Dr. Jason McDougall, who is a basic cannabis research, understanding how cannabis affects the pain signals that go to your brain. And the other is Dr. Mark Ware, who is a clinician who is doing a study on the effects of cannabis for patients with fibromyalgia, which is an all-over body pain kind of disease, is the simplest way to describe it. And those are 2 pieces of research.
And what about the industry? How is the industry?
Well, it's kind of a timely question that Dr. Ware left academia to join industry because he wanted to achieve finish line goals. And so he now works with Canopy and is testing some of these. So we have about 15 trials that we've teed up, because first you have to be able to prove that you have stabilized ingredients. And then you make something called a drug master file so that you can actually say, I can confirm that I did the same thing over and over versus having variability at the base. And so in the Canopy world, we're all over it because I would sooner export to Germany intellectual property that helps a person through, whether it's an RA sort of spectrum item or to sleep, than export just raw materials. And so I think any industry participant that isn't looking at trials has a very short-term objective. Like, it's just nonsense not to want to do trials. And they're not costly, right? We have 330,000 patients in Canada, which I think in Canada, we have more federally registered patients under a controlled system than the rest of the world combined. And that means we can do great trials and we can put people in sleep trials. I need about 160 people for a sleep trial. I bet everybody in this audience is ready to volunteer for that. You may or may not get cannabis, but for sure you get a night in Montreal. You know, that's the kind of thing. Yeah, and everybody put your hand up who slept perfectly for the last month, because mine's not going up. And what you don't want to do is start using things that are, build a profile that doesn't work. And so I think that's the kind of thing that's going to change the world.
Okay, we're going to take another break, and we'll be back with more of the Zoomer.
When rheumatologists, doctors, other specialists are prescribing treatments for their patients, they're including, if appropriate, medical cannabis as one of the things, and then they should be able to not only go to the pharmacy to get that prescription filled, but they should also have it covered under drug benefit plans.
I'm here to remind our parishioners, our members of CARP, older Canadians, that generally speaking, most older Canadians are taking a variety of pharmaceutical medicines for a variety of conditions, and they should be mindful of that as they proceed to try marijuana if they haven't already tried marijuana. And that's why our position at CARP has been that we think medical marijuana should be largely dispensed in pharmacies.
And medicinal marijuana advocates see getting pharmacists on board to dispense the drugs as the next step. As medication experts, they appear best equipped to provide clinical advice to patients on how to avoid harmful drug interactions, contraindications, and potential addictive behavior. I don't even understand why this is controversial.
Well, because in 2012 and 13, when they were asked, would you help out and participate in this, uniformly, every pharmacy said, we will never do anything with marijuana. All the owners, all the pharmacists. And then 330,000 people signed up to get cannabis from the licensed producers, which means 330,000 people don't go into those stores anymore, or maybe not as often. So now they care about it. So they should have both. But if you have both, guess what's going to happen? The price is going to stay tighter. If you let pharmacists look after being your only source, you are going to pay twice as much, maybe more. If you're not making a lot of money, you can prove that you're sort of in that income bracket, which is, needs support. We deliver cannabis to people's homes for $4.80 a gram, including shipping. It's federally certified. You put that only in pharmacies, get used to 16 bucks. And then think about, pharmacies should be a place where you actually have finished goods, medical outcome products. They don't sell anything smokable, so they're going to immediately start trying to stop that. And so I really think it's good to have both. I'm not opposed to both, but I think if you only have one, it's been good for me, but I think having only pharmacies will be bad for everybody else, so keep them both.
Yeah, I'm not sure anybody's talking about only pharmacists.
What we're trying to do in having it taken seriously as medicine is saying that in addition to the mail order stream, we want to make sure that when rheumatologists, doctors, other specialists are prescribing treatments for their patients, they're including, if appropriate, medical cannabis as one of the things, and then they should be able to not only go to the pharmacy to get that prescription filled, but they should also have it covered under drug benefit plans, which is another affordability issue that is starting to be addressed with insurers starting to cover medical cannabis.
Some do already, notably the big union, LIUNA, the construction union, they cover it.
Well, there's quite a number of examples now, but it's really interesting. 3 years ago, when I used to talk to insurance companies about being leaders in providing coverage for medical cannabis, they weren't interested. Now, because of consumer pressure, employers are starting to say, well, I guess we better include it, and so they're starting to.
Well, there's also the issue of interactions, because a lot of older people are on sleeping pills, benzodiazepines, anxiety drugs, and I'm thinking that those are most likely to have interactions and not good ones with medicinal marijuana.
I think you'll see there's a lot of work on profiling drug-on-drug interaction. And so the reason we end up with like a lot of diabetic patients, if you have a very high sensitivity to interaction, so there is a profile, but it's lower than most other drug-on-drug and concerns. So I think pharmacists will help with that. But what they need, and for the claims, you can't make a claim that it helps you sleep until you do a phase 2B trial. That's the kind of trials we're doing. And then when it works, that claim is valid and allows us to put it in the right spot, and how much THC CBD might make it an over-the-counter product versus an RX product. And so unions are smart, and you're well thought out. The reason they are increasingly going to cover it from insurers is it's less costly than the other pharmaceutical product at the point of sale, and it has a very low profile of not returning to work. So if you have a construction worker union, it's a business problem if people get hurt, get addicted, and don't return.
Well, exactly.
And so that's a big deal.
Opioid addiction is huge for everybody. I'm sure police see a huge amount.
We see it all the time, yeah. Naloxone's been distributed in Toronto, carried by our officers. It definitely is a challenge. There's no question that Canada and the provinces are on a world stage where there's no question.
And of course, one of the other issues is what happens to people who were previously convicted of simple possession.
So what we've heard from the federal government is that there will be pardons issued for individuals who had a simple possession conviction. So that's not everyone who has a cannabis or a marijuana-related charge. It's a pretty narrow subset. And we've also heard that it'll be an expedited process and that the filing fee will be waived. Could we go farther with this? I do think so. I think that this is a good first step, and possibly expungement, which is different than a pardon because it is more of an acknowledgement that this never should have been a crime in the first place. That's maybe the next step.
And then there's this whole issue that's cropped up about what happens when you travel to the States. It's interesting. I heard from people who were reluctant to sign up at the online store because they said, we're afraid what's going to happen to our data. And not 2 weeks later, there was a data breach.
Yeah, no, I think there's quite a few stories out there, right? We have a very funny system in Canada in that we have a capital markets, stock exchanges, which, to my opinion, aren't very much regulated, which means U.S. companies come up here to raise money because they can't raise it in the U.S. And if you're a person in Canada and you buy that stock, you probably didn't even know that they're breaking federal laws. But when you do that, it gets really nasty words around it. It's called aiding and abetting a RICO Act offense. That sounds terrible. And when you make money, when you invest money, it's called racketeering. And when you make a profit, it's called money laundering. And so those are really nasty words. And I would say that that probably got the story going because you can't help. It's federally illegal in the U.S. When you do it, it's causing a bit of a heartburn. As far as me, I cross the border probably twice a week and I wear my tweed t-shirt because I think a border job is to sense if you're hiding something. And so I wear my tweed t-shirt and I explain that I am the, if they ask, I don't run off and offer it, but if they ask, I'm the largest producer of legal marijuana in the world. And that the DEA has only one party they've approved supply of cannabis oils for research to America, and that's from us. And the DEA is pretty careful about that. They took 2 years to be sure we're good, and that we're on the New York Stock Exchange, and the guys that make all your Corona gave me $5 billion. And I've had 4 times where they asked me extra questions, but it was all about their 401k and investing in our stock. So I think, for the most part, I don't know that anyone's crossed the border.
So why are other people getting stopped at the border? People who are invest in legal cannabis companies in the United States that are
well, they're not legal, but they're not legal in the United States. They're federally illegal.
Right, but they're legal in the States, and the people who own and operate those legal companies are not getting harassed at all. It's just Canadian investors.
They might be, and they don't say anything, but when they're, who does the guy at the border work for? He works for the federal government. So if you're doing something that's against the federal government's law, and the federal government guy says, are you doing that? There's a chance they may say, we don't like that.
Okay, we're going to take another break, and when we return, we'll take some questions from the audience.
And I had a personal situation where a friend, they were in a loft, and it's 6 apartments, and somebody was smoking marijuana on the main floor, and they had a prescription for it. The police have been called. They couldn't do anything about it.
Welcome back. Now it's time for some questions from the audience. And first up is Muriel. Hi, Muriel.
Hi. We have touched on some of the condo laws and things like that. And I had a personal situation where a friend, they were in a loft, and it's 6 apartments, and somebody was smoking marijuana on the main floor, and they had a prescription for it. The police have been called. They couldn't do anything about it. But all of the apartments had this smell inside their place, and her daughter was in grade 12 and had to leave all the time to go to the library because she was getting migraines and nauseous from it. So my question was, like, what are we going to be doing about this?
So there are going to be competing interests and balancing of rights. And I think that with a little bit of common sense and courtesy respect, so for example, if you are smoking, perhaps you have a filter, or perhaps you can look into insulating your pipes, or maybe you're doing it by a window. Small steps like that. Ultimately, if there is substantial interference with someone else's enjoyment or ability to reside, it sounds like that's what you're describing, then you have to revisit the situation and how can this work? And the Human Rights Code, which is what governs housing situations, the threshold is undue hardship. So you accommodate to the point of undue hardship. Now that's true if you're a medical patient requiring accommodation, but if you're causing undue hardship to someone else, we have to revisit that.
Okay, thanks for your question.
Thank you.
And stay right there. We'll be right back with some final thoughts.
On Facebook, Lauren writes, I'm all for legal cannabis. However, the government needs to step in and make sure all regulations are clear in order to provide consumers and non-consumers with equal rights. On Twitter, Kevin tweets, people need to slow down and appreciate what we have here. A chance to influence the rest of the world. Canada makes cannabis legal and takes a step in the right direction. #LegalCannabis. Keep the comments coming in, and don't forget to log on to www.thezoomertv.com for full episodes and more.
Welcome back. Our panelists will leave you with some final thoughts, starting to my left.
Well, we're really far into this new world, right? We're almost a month and 3 days. And so I think really these questions are good, but let's do this every year. And the topics will be about how do we deliver things without smoking. There'll be an answer there. How do we have better leases that'll be done? People understand that 0.08 was not an impairment level. It was because that became the judicial level. And so I think we're going to figure it all out. We're pretty excited for 33 days after legalization, I think, though. It's just a start.
Well, with the senior population doubling over the next 10 to 15 years, I think this is a great development, and we're in early stages. I think it'll be very beneficial once the research catches up and we have some answers.
Impaired driving is impaired driving, whether it be by alcohol or drug, and we know that to be true. So again, inform yourselves about about the new rules, the new laws that are in place. Know that your police services across the province have the skills and the training, the ability to detect and to arrest and prosecute folks, but also a big part of it as well is about education. So that's what we're working towards, and so far, so good. We're keeping an eye on things, and we're happy to report the stats as we go along this.
And I'll just piggyback on the notion of education. One thing that I've observed in my practice is there's a strong contingency of people who'd like to maintain the status quo and not have cannabis infiltrate their lives and not be accosted by it. And I think that knee-jerk reaction comes from stigma in some ways, and it can be worked against if people behave with some common sense and mutual respect for one another, consume and carry about your legal activities in a way that minimally impairs the rights of others.
Well, I would say that we are delighted on behalf of patients that the medical cannabis regime is coexisting with legalization of recreational marijuana. And I would say when I look out 3 years from now, I'm comforted by the notion that there will be a lot more research on medical efficacy. There will be pharmacy distribution, and medical cannabis will be seen as an effective medicine for the treatment of a number of diseases where we're just starting to figure it out right now.
Okay. The legalization of cannabis is a huge change in our laws that reflects a huge change in our attitudes, and it'll take time and trial and error to get it right. So thank you to the panel for being with us. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you soon. It's time to zoom out.
you.